Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, my name is Sylvia and I make videos on bookish and writerly things. Reading has always allowed me to escape into someone else's world. Writing allows me to disappear into my own world, and at the same time, both allow me to find myself. Join me as I experiment on how to best tackle projects, figure out how to stick with habit tracking, and celebrate the wins, both big and small. So grab a cup or a glass of whatevs and let's get on with the video. Hello, bookish and writerly friends, and welcome to my book talk. I've been wanting to do this for a while now, and I finally figured it out enough that I can sit down and make it as simplistic as possible, and hopefully I will be able to build, but if I make it too complex, I'm never going to get it done. So today's book is going to be called Toxic Prey, and this is a book that my mystery book club at my local library chose, and I already had the book club, and it was really great, and so I'm going to incorporate some of the information that we bounced off of each other as we're wondering what's really going on in this book, what were some of our favorite parts, what were our least favorite parts. Now, if you're looking for a spoiler-free book talk, I will link that down below. I'm not sure how I'm going to be doing those. They might be just really small, short stories. 3 minutes or less at this point, I think, is what YouTube is doing. And this longer video is going to be all the spoilers. So let's get started. On the cover of this book, it doesn't only say the name of the author, it also says the title. But there was this part that I had to kind of look up because I was like, okay, it's implying that there are maybe two characters or two series coming together to work as one. So it says a Lucas and Letty Davenport novel. So I went and looked it up because this is the first time I've ever read a John Sandford book before. And Lucas Davenport is one of his main characters to one of his huge series that I think there's like 35 books of. And basically this guy is a U.S. Marshal that solves murders. And so I'm like, okay, I get that. And Letty is his daughter. And Letty has two books as of 2024 when this book was created, because I looked at the little list of all of the books that you should go and read by John Sandford. So his daughter Letty has a series that has just started, and I think that she has two books in that series, and then this one is like the crossover between their two series together, where father and daughter, the older, wiser Marshall, and then this younger and more, just kind of new to the game agent of Homeland Security, get together. They get a task force and they're trying to find a missing doctor named Dr. Scott. And the book just refers to him mostly as Scott, so I probably will. His name is Dr. Lionel Scott. And so we go on this hunt for Dr. Scott, and she goes to England to basically meet up with a British intelligence agent named Alec Hawkins. And so now I don't know if Hawkins is in the other two books. He probably is, but he comes in like she already knows him. So maybe she met him on another case in that book. I can't remember because I kept looking for the mystery in this book, which is not here. And we'll get to that. Anyway, so her and Hawkins are having a relationship. It's definitely sexual. We don't know if they are boyfriend and girlfriend, but definitely in a sleepover time relationship. And so she brings him in on the case, and together they are looking into Dr. Scott's disappearance when they realize that it's possible that he's gone rogue. And part of what Dr. Scott studies is viruses, and he also creates them. He's like a virologist or something is what they called him. And I will flash that on the screen with a definition for those who are interested. And so they have gotten together all this evidence, and they find out that he is in the United States and that he's possibly going to release a deadly virus in the country. So she calls her father, who is the U.S. Marshal, whose name is Lucas Davenport, and they get together a task force, and they're on the hunt for a Dr. Scott. Now, when we get to Dr. Scott, and we do right away in the beginning of the book, and I'm like, well, he's no longer missing. So what is this mystery that we're going to be, solving? And I thought, okay, well, maybe somebody is still going to end up being murdered. But then in my brain, I'm like, well, wouldn't it be Dr. Scott who killed them? I'm really confused. So that's the end of the mystery. Ta-da! Dr. Scott has been found. So my book club and I decided that this is definitely a thriller. It could be considered a suspense thriller, but certainly not a mystery because there isn't anything to solve other than Dr. Scott, and we found him. And so at first, I'm pretty surprised that Dr. Scott is evil because he saves a young boy. A woman comes to him in New Mexico where he is and says, my son is sick and I need some help. And he's a doctor. So he asks what's wrong. And right away, the doctor, as well as us, the reader, realize that he has appendicitis and he saves this boy. And I'm like, okay, well, is he bad or not bad? I'm like, maybe they've got some wrong information about him and he's actually good and we're hunting the wrong guy. But no, he's evil. So Dr. Scott believes in this hypothesis. It's probably really called a theory. I think it's called the Gaia hypothesis. And basically we're gonna take the word Gaia and we're gonna replace it with Earth. Earth is dying. It's our fault because we're evil people. And the planet is overpopulated and climate change is a thing. And so therefore, this is a simplified version. I will absolutely flash on the screen what Gaia means and what the theory is. And so he decides that he's going to create this virus to take out like half of the planet because that's the only way to immediately change or shift what has been done to Earth. So there's definitely a lot of tension and suspense in this book because it's essentially like a race against time. They believe that Dr. Scott is going to release this virus. They don't know when. It's probably any time now, and they've got to find him immediately. Dr. Scott is in the situation where he's trying to get to an international airport, but because they've worked really fast with law enforcement, his ways of transportation are kind of limited. At some point he gets on a bike, which I thought was pretty cool and interesting. And I thought, yeah, nobody's going to stop somebody on a bike thinking, yeah, I'm going to bike to release a virus. So that was pretty funny. But he has his loyal band of followers, these rationalists that also believe in the Gaia hypothesis. And so they are trying to find a place to release this. And this is sort of where the author lost me. First of all, my first thought was, why are we coming to the United States to release the virus if we're worried about population? Why not in China? Why not in somewhere in Asia? Why not in India? But they chose the United States. And right now, if you look it up, it will say that there's, some facts that will tell you that the United States is in an increase of population due to COVID and, the aftermath of COVID, because a lot of people were home and there was nothing else to do but, hug each other. So we went into an increase of population. But before that, we were in a decrease, and it's probably going to go into a decrease again if you're looking at the facts. And there has been a conversation about within the next decade or maybe in the next 15 years of having to give some kind of financial benefits to having children because we are in such a decrease. Just basically in the United States, we're not having babies. And so I didn't understand why they went to the United States. And I'm like, okay, but then what state does he choose to go to? New Mexico. And if you're looking at the population of all 50 states in the United States and you look at New Mexico, it's on the lower end. I mean, like you have to go to somewhere like the North and South Dakotas in order to find a least populated state. It was, what I'm saying here, I was like, okay, wouldn't you go to California? Wouldn't you go to New York? And yes, he is there is a point in the book where the author says that Dr. Scott is just trying to get to an international airport where this could be spread. But I'm just like, really? And I think at some point, I can't remember, there's like 3 vials of this. He has a limited amount of vials of this virus and he's passing people by and I'm like, just break one of them on anyone and it's going to spread. And then if you find a bigger crowd, great. That never happens. And I'm like, of course it doesn't. So what ends up happening, the virus does eventually end up getting out. It's released in this small little church, I think maybe towards the outside of the church or the inside, I can't even remember, before they end up killing the woman who released it. So you have this situation that's very interesting because here you are in a church where people usually, find their sanctuary and they go to for sanctuary, and yet they have been poisoned with this horrible virus, and they also have to be isolated in the church and they're not really told much. I mean, can you really tell people there is this deadly virus and you have been exposed? Because they probably would freak out and try to run from, the church in all directions, and they might not be able to shoot them all. So they kind of just don't tell them very much other than they have to stay in there, and everyone inside the church is like, do they think we're sick? We all feel fine. It's a horrible situation. At one point, you have, I think it was Lucas Davenport, they're saying, listen, you got to get back in that church or I'm going to shoot you. And then the priest comes out. I think there's a couple other people that come out with a child. And these adults, it seemed kind of evil, like nefarious in my mind, because it's like they were pushing out this child, like, you wouldn't shoot a child, would you? And he's like, yes, I would shoot a child. Which made me laugh, and I was on his side definitely, because if you don't, what ends up happening is you have these dilemmas, and you have a moral dilemma. If you don't shoot the child and the child ends up going to the village or anywhere else in town, it infects a bunch of other people, and who knows what happens. So in the end, yes, the virus gets out. They also talk about how the children ended up dying, I think, more than any of the adults did. And that seemed very interesting to me, because why did the author choose to have Dr. Scott save a child from appendicitis, only to have killed mostly children? And it's almost like this controversy and this argument that you could make that, yes, you make this virus and you're hoping it's going to kill, all of the adults and half of the world, but it ends up affecting the children the most, who are the future of the world. And even though you have created a virus, you can't really predict there's too many variables, and you can't predict how it's going to react or how people or children are going to react to it, which was sort of the opposite of COVID. And there was definitely a lot of COVID talk in our book club, as we are trying to relate to how this would look and what it would be like. And this happened mostly in Taos, New Mexico, which I've been to at least once. And living in Colorado in a very rural area, we had that conversation. It was like, why are you going to New Mexico? Why are you going to Taos? And I think the author kind of just writes this off as being like Taos kind of being like Aspen. It's like a very touristy place that people go. And so there'll be a lot of people that are going to be stopping there in Taos and then moving on to other like touristy destinations. I guess that's the thought there. And I'm just like, okay. But there were plenty of people that they could have poisoned. I mean, even the police department and some of the agents went to the store that sold Scott the bike. Well, it wasn't Scott. It was actually one of the radicalists that he was with that was posing as a cancer patient. There was a lot of interesting, smart things that were happening in this book, like getting on the bike, posing as a cancer patient so people wouldn't look at you twice, which is totally true and awful. So I would really like to see this as a TV series or a movie. In a book, it works okay. But still, I kind of got confused a little bit at first. I had to remember that Letty was kind of in a relationship or involved and possibly and met Alec Hawkins in another book, because I kept thinking British intelligence. Did this whole story start in England? And I don't mean like, yes, it did. But like at first I was like, wait, was Dr. Scott in Europe at some point? He was in England and then flew to the United States, but that's just sort of not the case. So it was kind of confusing that he was there. And obviously there were other people in the book club who had read other books with Lucas Davenport as the detective. And so they had recognized a couple of other characters that were in the book that had showed up, and they were excited about that. But of course, I didn't get to appreciate that because I'd never read a book by John Sandford before. So to recap, overall, I would not call this a mystery. Again, I think it's like we had that conversation and people had read his books before. They really think because he has been established as a mystery author, they decided to sell it as a mystery. There's a lot of politics in here. You could call this a political thriller. Absolutely. I enjoyed the book. I gave it an 80%. I don't do a 5-star rating because I don't think you can get as specific with 5 stars, but I gave it 80%, which is decent enough. So as a reader, what kind of readers would I recommend this book to? Anyone who loves suspense. Like I mentioned, it's not a mystery. It does have some thrills in there, but it doesn't have like the mystery kind of thrills. It's more of a suspense type. So highly recommended if you love suspense. Anything like Dan Brown, I mean, there's not as much research that goes into this, but there is definitely some research in there. So anyone who kind of likes the suspense of Dan Brown, I highly recommend this. It has that kind of vibe to it. I'm sure there are other authors that are better fit to compare them to. However, I don't really read those types of books. So off the top of my head, Dan Brown is who I really think of when I'm thinking about this style of book. What type of writer would I recommend this to? Anyone who started off with a small town crime and you wanted to expand that to a search of the United States. Certainly this book started in England with them doing more of the investigation online than anything else. And then they came to the United States, which is huge. And then they kind of honed down to the state of New Mexico and Taos. So anyone who's trying to write that and kind of see how that looks and feels and how you can keep the suspense going, I feel like this book did a really good job with that. And that is everything I have on Toxic Prey by John Sandford. Let me know if you've read any of his other books, and if you read this book, what were your thoughts and feelings? Did I leave anything out? Again, this is all for my own recall, and we're not always going to get everything right, and there's always going to be something we didn't cover, or maybe it didn't stand out for me, because again, for the most part, I kept looking for where the mystery was and holding on to things I didn't need to hold on to because there wasn't one. Dr. Scott was found. So let me know down below what your thoughts were of this book. Now, the next book that my mystery book club is going to be reading is called Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. And I don't know anything about this author or the book, and that's the way I like to go into things. So definitely be looking for that in February. My book clubs end at the end of the month. I wish they're kind of in the middle, but this allows me to get the perspective of my book club before I come in here and add on more stuff that might be interesting to you, because it's always nice to bounce ideas off of other people. So yeah, that's everything that I've got. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I hope that this was helpful. And as always, don't forget to read a book, write a book. Sincerely, Sylvia. Bye.